Western powers will stop draining Africa's blood. Ibrahim Traoré's powerful voice echoed throughout the conference hall at the Africa-Europe Economic Summit in Geneva. Western diplomats and businessmen froze in shock. Traoré forcefully placed classified documents on the table that no one had expected to see. The evidence in my hands proves how you've robbed US for the past 40 years. The face of French Foreign Minister Philippe Moreau turned pale white. Cameras were quickly shut down, but one African channel remained on live broadcast. 3 days later, at the presidential palace in Burkina Faso, Traoré read a note from his chief of staff: emergency. French delegation requesting a meeting. A slight smile appeared on Traoré's face. Let them come, he said calmly, and tell them to bring their proposals with them. When the door opened, standing before him was not just the French ambassador but 3 high-ranking intelligence officials who had flown in from Paris on a private jet. Mr. Traoré, said the ambassador with a trembling voice, where did you get those files? A week earlier, at the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré had been working late into the night. It had been only 6 months since he had taken the presidential seat. The economic reports on his desk were concerning. Despite having some of the world's richest gold deposits, his country was struggling with poverty. Something is wrong here, Traoré muttered to himself. At that moment, a message arrived on his phone from an unknown number. Mr. President, I need to share something very important with you. I'm waiting at the Eastern Gate in the Palace Gardens. Marcel Zongo, National Mining and Geology Department. Traoré knew the risks of breaking security protocols, but his instincts told him not to ignore this message. Without informing his personal guards, he descended to the eastern garden of the palace. In the darkness, Marcel Zongo, a man in his 50s with tired eyes, stood among the trees. What I'm about to show you puts my life at risk, but I must do this for our country, he said, pulling a thick folder from his bag. What is this? Traoré asked. Documents showing the true value of resources extracted from our country by Western mining companies and governments over the last 20 years, said Zongo. I'm just a geologist, but I've been keeping records for years. When I compared them with the official reports, I realized that the real figures are many times higher than what's been reported to the government. Traoré was shocked as he examined the file. If these figures are correct, billions of dollars worth of resources are being stolen from our country every year. Not just Burkina Faso, said Zongo. All of West Africa is in the same situation. Guinea, Mali, Niger? All of them. Why did you come to me with this information? Traoré asked. Because you're different, said Zongo. You're a true patriot. Someone who loves Africa. If I had taken this information to previous presidents, I would have been killed by the French Secret Service by now. How will we use this information against them? Traoré asked. The Africa-Europe Economic Summit is in Geneva in 2 days, said Zongo. All the Western leaders and corporate executives will be there. You need to beat them at their own game. Traoré nodded thoughtfully. If I use this information, I'll make powerful enemies. They're already your enemies, Mr. President, said Zongo. You just don't know it yet. The next day, a small team of Traoré's trusted advisors spent the night examining the documents. What they saw revealed how Burkina Faso and other African countries had been systematically plundered over the past 40 years. Gold, copper, uranium, and other valuable minerals had been illegally extracted from the continent in amounts up to 10 times what was reported in official documents. Are these documents reliable? Asked Diallo, Traoré's economic advisor. Zongo risked his life to bring these to us, said Traoré. Besides, we've compared them with data in our national archives. They match. These documents are genuine. Cameras were quickly shut down, but one African channel remained on live broadcast. What now? Asked Kamara, his foreign affairs advisor. What will we do with this information? Let them come, he said calmly, and tell them to bring their proposals with them. We're going to Geneva, said Traoré, with a determined glint in his eyes. And we're going to tell Africa's true story. That night, Traoré summoned his chief of staff. Don't ask them to prepare a speech for me for the Geneva summit, he said. I'll deliver my own speech. Despite having some of the world's richest gold deposits, his country was struggling with poverty. The Africa-Europe Economic Summit in Geneva was being held in the largest hall of the historic United Nations building. World leaders and representatives of economic giants had gathered to discuss new investment plans for Africa's sustainable development. I'm waiting at the Eastern Gate in the Palace Gardens. When Ibrahim Traoré entered the hall with a small team, a wave of whispers spread around him. The young leader, who had recently come to power through a military coup, had been labeled anti-democratic by Western powers. But among the people of Burkina Faso, he was a hero. As leaders of African countries took turns speaking at the podium, Traoré quietly continued to review the documents. When his turn came, he walked to the podium with the thick folder in hand. Distinguished delegates, esteemed leaders, Traoré began in a calm voice. We've gathered here today to discuss Africa's future. But before I talk about Africa's future, I want to talk about Africa's past and present. I'm just a geologist, but I've been keeping records for years. The hall fell silent. French President Pierre Laurent adjusted his earpiece to hear Traoré's speech. The German Chancellor and British Prime Minister were also listening attentively. Over the past 40 years, Traoré continued, the value of resources legally extracted from the African continent has been declared as $2.4 trillion. But the documents I have show that the real figure is 3 times that, $7.2 trillion. Not just Burkina Faso, said Zongo. Murmurs of surprise rose in the hall. Western delegates began to shift uncomfortably. Where did this $4.8 trillion difference go? This enormous wealth, illegally removed from our continent, unrecorded, bringing no benefit to our countries, has filled the accounts of Western corporations and some political leaders. Traoré asked. French Foreign Minister Philippe Moreau made eye contact with the representative from the United States. Both had concern on their faces. Traoré opened the folder on the podium and pulled out a document. Burkina Faso gold transferred to a secret offshore account at Grand Banque in Paris over the last decade. Value, $14 billion. Not a single cent of this money ever returned to our country. Traoré asked. United Nations Secretary-General Ludwig Meyer stood up. Mr. Traoré, these are extremely serious accusations. What is the source of these documents? Traoré nodded thoughtfully. Traoré shouted, his voice heard even in the farthest corners of the hall. They're already your enemies, Mr. President, said Zongo. The face of French Foreign Minister Philippe Moreau turned pale white. Technical teams tried to cut off Traoré's microphone, but Burkina Faso's technical team was prepared and had activated an alternative sound system. Distinguished delegates, the African continent will now determine its own destiny, Traoré continued. These documents in our possession will be distributed to the world press starting tomorrow. Every country will see who has plundered them. As UN security officers moved to remove Traoré from the podium, delegations from African countries stood up and stepped forward to protect him. The hall suddenly descended into chaos. Traoré's speech was reaching every corner of Africa. This is an outrage, shouted French President Pierre Laurent, calling his advisors to an emergency meeting. We need to find out how these documents were leaked. As the hall emptied, Ibrahim Traoré and his team were escorted out with applause from the representatives of African countries. As the Burkina Faso delegation safely returned to their hotel, Traoré looked at his advisors. This is just the beginning, he said. Now the real negotiation begins. After Traoré's speech, the world media was in turmoil. Streets across Africa were filled with demonstrations of pride and anger. On the stock exchanges of Paris, London, and New York, mining company shares were experiencing sharp drops. Boss, we have a major problem, said Jean-Claude Mercier, CEO of Franco-African Mining Corporation, as he called an emergency meeting at the company's London headquarters. The documents Traoré has are genuine. If they're published in full, our company is finished. Besides, we've compared them with data in our national archives. We must stop these documents from being published, said Robert Anderson, the company's legal director. We can use our connections in Burkina Faso. We could try to overthrow Traoré. Cameras were quickly shut down, but one African channel remained on live broadcast. No, said Mercier, looking out the window. This time it's different. Africa is changing. If we try to overthrow Traoré, the entire continent will rise up. We'll have to negotiate. And we're going to tell Africa's true story. 3 days later, at the presidential palace in Burkina Faso, Traoré read a note from his chief of staff, emergency. French delegation requesting a meeting. Don't ask them to prepare a speech for me for the Geneva summit, he said. A slight smile appeared on Traoré's face. Let them come, he said calmly, and tell them to bring their proposals with them. The Africa-Europe Economic Summit in Geneva was being held in the largest hall of the historic United Nations building. When the door opened, standing before him was not just the French ambassador but 3 high-ranking intelligence officials who had flown in from Paris on a private jet. Mr. Traoré, said the ambassador with a trembling voice, where did you get those files? When Ibrahim Traoré entered the hall with a small team, a wave of whispers spread around him. That doesn't matter, Mr. Ambassador, said Traoré, with an innocent expression. What matters is the information in these documents. And in 48 hours, they'll be distributed worldwide. Unless, of course, we can reach an agreement. Distinguished delegates, esteemed leaders, Traoré began in a calm voice. "What do you want?" asked one of the officials in a harsh tone. "What I want is simple," said Traoré. "First, I want your companies to start paying taxes on the true value of resources they extract from our country. Second, I want compensation for unpaid taxes to date. Third, I want mining rights to be renegotiated. And finally, I want you to stop interfering in our country's internal affairs." But the documents I have show that the real figure is 3 times that, $7.2 trillion. The French officials exchanged glances. "All these demands are impossible," said the ambassador. "Then," said Traoré, standing up, "this meeting is over. Tomorrow morning, all the documents will be published in The Guardian, The New York Times, Le Monde, and Al Jazeera. This enormous wealth, illegally removed from our continent, unrecorded, bringing no benefit to our countries, has filled the accounts of Western corporations and some political leaders." "Wait," said the head of the officials. Perhaps we can accept some of your terms. But only if these documents are not published. Value, $14 billion. Traoré sat down again. "I'm listening." United Nations Secretary-General Ludwig Meyer stood up. After hours of negotiation, the French officials presented their offer: renegotiation of mining agreements, repayment of a portion of unpaid taxes, and reduction of the French military presence in Burkina Faso. "This is not enough," said Traoré with determination. "Either you accept all of it, or none of it." The negotiations continued until morning. As the sun rose, the French delegation finally gave in. They agreed to accept all of Burkina Faso's conditions within a specific timeframe. "A delegation will come from Paris within 3 days for the official signing of the agreement," said the ambassador, exhausted. "Now, please, will you promise not to publish the documents?" Technical teams tried to cut off Traoré's microphone, but Burkina Faso's technical team was prepared and had activated an alternative sound system. "I agree to keep some of the documents confidential for now," said Traoré. "But know that we have them, and if you break the agreement, we will publish them. Every country will see who has plundered them." As the French delegation left the palace, Traoré watched them from the window. Marcel Zongo appeared at the door. "You've succeeded, Mr. President," said Zongo with pride. "We've succeeded," said Traoré. "But this is just the beginning. Other African countries must join this struggle," shouted French President Pierre Laurent, calling his advisors to an emergency meeting. A week later, a historic agreement was signed in Paris. According to the agreement, France committed to paying fair taxes on its mining operations in Burkina Faso, settling past obligations, and not interfering in the country's internal affairs. A process would also be initiated to review the activities of Western companies in other African countries. Following the signing of the agreement, Traoré addressed the people of Burkina Faso. "Today, we've taken an important step toward our independence. But true independence is economic independence. And this struggle will continue." After Traoré's speech, the world media was in turmoil. Marcel Zongo met with Traoré in secret once more. "The documents I showed you were just the tip of the iceberg," he said. "There's more, and it's not just France, but England, America, China. They're all engaged in similar practices. We'll deal with all of them in time," said Traoré. "But we need to be careful. We've made powerful enemies." "Powerful enemies and powerful allies," corrected Zongo. "All of Africa's youth support you." 3 months after this event, the African Union held an extraordinary meeting. At the meeting, a declaration titled "Africa's Resources Belong to Africa" was adopted. The declaration envisioned the fair sharing of the continent's natural resources and a joint struggle against exploitation. At the meeting, Ibrahim Traoré received a standing ovation. When he took the podium, he addressed the other African leaders. "We are not leaders here, but servants of our people. It is our duty to protect their interests. And to do this, we must stand united." After the meeting, a young journalist approached Traoré. "Mr. President, were you really going to publish those documents in Geneva? Or was it a bluff?" Traoré smiled. "Diplomacy sometimes consists of bluffs as much as truths, young man. What matters is the outcome. And the outcome benefits our people." As the journalist wanted to ask more questions, Traoré's security team intervened. But Traoré told the young man one more thing: "Remember, our greatest weapons are knowledge and unity. Always remember that." In Burkina Faso, the new revenue from the agreement funded schools, hospitals, and infrastructure projects. For the first time, the people were seeing the true value of their resources. 6 months later, the Financial Times in London ran the headline, "The New Order for Africa's Natural Resources, Western Companies Must Adapt." That same day, an unexpected visitor came to Ibrahim Traoré's office. Marcel Zongo looked worried. Mr. President, Western intelligence services are following me. My life could be in danger. Calm down, Marcel, said Traoré. We'll protect you. You're a hero, not a traitor. To them, I'm a traitor, said Zongo. And they'll want revenge. It's not like it used to be, said Traoré. The world is changing. Africa is changing. And you're one of the pioneers of this change. A year later, speaking at the United Nations General Assembly, Ibrahim Traoré delivered this message to the world: Africa is no longer a continent waiting for aid, but a continent standing on its own feet. And we are ready to cooperate with the entire world on equal terms. After his speech, long applause erupted. Supportive voices for African leaders rose from every corner of the hall. Mr. Traoré, said UN Secretary-General Ludwig Meyer, the movement you've started is affecting not just Africa, but the entire world. This is an important step toward a more just world order. Thank you, Mr. Secretary-General, said Traoré. But this movement doesn't belong to me, it belongs to all the peoples of Africa. Without their courage and determination, we wouldn't be here today. That night, a large crowd gathered in front of Traoré's hotel in New York. African Americans, African students, and other supporters carried banners reading, "We support Traoré, and Africa's future is bright." Traoré saluted them from the hotel balcony. Africa's voice is now stronger, he called out. And this voice demands justice, equality, and respect. As he flew back to Burkina Faso, Traoré was lost in thought. A year ago, when he decided to take the podium at that meeting in Geneva, he hadn't expected to make such a significant impact. But now he saw that sometimes history is shaped by the actions of individuals who make bold decisions. When he landed at Ouagadougou airport, thousands of Burkinabe were there to greet him. Traoré, Traoré, they chanted. Traoré walked, waving to the crowd. A child approached him and offered him a flower. "When I grow up, I want to be like you," said the child. Traoré bent down and looked into the child's eyes. "No, my little brother," he said. "Don't be like me. Be yourself. Because each of us is here to build Africa's future. And this duty belongs to all of us." Once known as the Dark Continent, Africa was now being called the Continent of Hope. And one of the architects of this hope was the brave leader, Ibrahim Traoré, who stood up that day in Geneva and shouted, "Western powers